The day I realized not everyone deserves access to me was the day my own son stopped asking how I was, but never stopped asking for money. It didn't happen during an argument or a dramatic confrontation. It happened quietly, the way most important realizations do, while I was standing alone in my kitchen stirring a pot of tomato sauce that had been simmering for 3 hours. I had set the table for 4 that night. Cloth napkins. The good china with the thin gold rim. 2 candles and silver holders Daniel gave me years ago when he still believed I liked fancy things. It was the 45th anniversary of the day his father and I said our vows in a small white church just outside Columbus. I told myself I wasn't expecting anything extravagant. Just dinner. Just company. Just the sound of my grandson's sneakers running across my hardwood floors again. At 5:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. Mom, something came up. Rain check. That was all it said. No explanation. No apology long enough to feel sincere. I stood there for a moment, the wooden spoon still in my hand, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. I typed back, "Of course, sweetheart." I always said of course. I always made it easy. By 6:15, the candles were lit anyway. I sat down at the table and waited, though I knew better. The house felt larger than its 2,400 square feet that night. The walls seemed to echo in places they never had before. Out of habit, I opened my phone and scrolled. That's when I saw it. Brittany's smile filled the screen. Napa Valley. Sunset behind them. Wine glasses raised. Daniel's arm around her shoulders. The caption read, "Much needed getaway." I looked at the timestamp. 23 minutes ago. The same hour my table sat untouched. I did not cry. I did not throw the phone across the room. I simply stared at the image until the screen dimmed. Over the past 3 years, I had added Daniel as an authorized user on my credit card. It started small. Mom, we're short this month. Mom, the kids' tuition increased. Mom, the remodel went a little over budget. I never asked for receipts. I never asked how much. I trusted him. I trusted that love worked both ways. The next morning, I made coffee and opened my banking app. I scrolled through the statements slowly. Flights to San Francisco. Boutique hotel charges. A winery tasting package for $480. I measured the numbers the way I measure flour when I bake. Carefully. Precisely. $78,000 over 3 years. I pressed my palm flat against the kitchen counter to steady myself. It wasn't the money that stung. It was the pattern. He called when he needed something. He texted when something was owed. But he had not asked how I was sleeping since his father passed. He did not know I had switched doctors. He did not know my arthritis flared in cold weather. Access. That was the word that formed quietly in my mind. They had access to my home. A spare key hung on Brittany's ring. They had access to my accounts. To my time. To my labor. I watched my grandson every Tuesday and Thursday without complaint. I stocked the fridge with his favorite yogurt cups. I kept a step stool by the sink so he could wash his hands like a big boy. But somewhere along the way, access replaced affection. And that night, staring at a photograph taken 2,400 miles away while my anniversary dinner cooled under soft yellow light, I understood something I should have learned sooner. Love does not require unlimited entry. And generosity without boundaries is not kindness. It is permission. I did not call Daniel the next morning. That was new for me. For years I had been the first one to smooth things over, to send the follow-up message that made everything comfortable again. Instead, I wiped down the kitchen counter, packed the untouched food into glass containers, and placed them neatly in the refrigerator. The house felt unusually still, but not empty in the same way as the night before. It felt observant, as if even the walls were waiting to see what I would do next. At 9:30, my phone lit up. Not a call. A notification from the bank confirming another charge. A spa reservation in California. $260. I sat down at the same table that had held my anniversary dinner and opened the full account statement on my laptop. I adjusted my reading glasses and scrolled slowly, line by line, month by month. Airfare upgrades. Dining reservations. A children's summer camp deposit in. The amount of $3,400. I had paid for their memories without being invited to make any of my own. I remembered the first time Brittany asked for the spare key. Just in case of emergencies, she had said, her smile soft and reassuring. I had handed it over without hesitation. A few months later, I came home from the grocery store to find her in my kitchen reorganizing my cabinets. I thought this would make more sense, she said lightly, as if my way of living in my own house had been a small inconvenience. I laughed then. I told myself she was being helpful. I told myself that young families were busy and stressed, and that if I could ease their burden, I should. I watched my grandson every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 hours at a time. I packed his lunch with apple slices cut just the way he liked. I kept extra socks in my hallway drawer in case he splashed in puddles. I did not mind the work. I minded the assumption. The assumption that I would always be available. That my calendar was permanently blank unless filled by them. Around noon, Daniel finally called. His voice was cheerful, relaxed. "Mom, did you get my text last night?" I told him I did. There was a pause. "You are not upset, are you?" he asked, but it sounded more like a routine check than genuine concern. I looked out the window at the maple tree in my yard, its leaves just beginning to turn the color of rust. "No," I said calmly. "I am not upset." That part was true. The sharp edge of hurt had already softened into something clearer. "By the way," he added casually, "we might need to use the card again next month. School tuition is due." I held the phone against my ear and listened to the quiet confidence in his tone. It was not entitlement in the way people imagine it. It was habit, a pattern reinforced over time. He had learned that I would not say no, and I realized in that moment that habits can be unlearned. After we hung up, I walked to the small desk in my living room and took out a notepad. I wrote down every recurring expense linked to that account. I wrote down every Tuesday and Thursday I had committed to childcare. The list was longer than I expected. Access, I thought again, not just to my money, but to my time, my home, my energy. I had never asked what I was receiving in return because I believed love did not keep score. But love also does not drain one side until it runs dry. I closed the notebook, folded my hands on top of it, and for the first time in years, I considered what my life would look like if the door was not always open. The following Tuesday arrived with a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in years, I did not automatically reach for my phone at 7 in the morning to confirm what time I should expect my grandson. I knew the routine by heart. Brittany would usually text at 7:15 with a short message that read, "Dropping him off at 9, as if my day had already been reserved without question. At 8:47, right on schedule, her car pulled into my driveway. I watched from the living room window as she stepped out, sunglasses on, coffee in hand, moving with the brisk confidence of someone who believed everything was exactly as it should be. When she rang the doorbell, I did not rush. I walked at my normal pace. I opened the door and smiled gently at my grandson, who ran inside and wrapped his arms around my waist. His innocence was never the issue. He was a child. He loved whoever showed up for him. Brittany lingered on the porch. "I might be a little late picking him up," she said casually. "I have a lunch that could run over." I nodded once. "We will see," I replied. She did not ask what that meant. She rarely listened long enough to notice subtle changes in tone. After she drove away, I sat with my grandson at the kitchen table while he colored dinosaurs with bright green markers. I watched his small hands press firmly against the paper and thought about how quickly patterns become expectations. For him, Tuesdays meant grandma. For his parents, Tuesdays meant free childcare. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed. A notification from the credit card company informed me that a payment was due in the amount of $4,200. I stared at the number and felt no panic. Only recognition. This was the system we had created together. They spent. I covered. They planned. I adjusted. At noon, while my grandson napped on the couch with a soft blanket tucked under his chin, I walked into my home office and picked up the phone. I called the bank directly. My voice did not tremble. I asked the representative to remove the authorized user from my account effective immediately. She asked if I was certain. I said yes. I wrote down the confirmation number carefully on the same notepad where I had listed every expense the day before. When I hung up, I felt neither angry nor triumphant. I felt aligned. At 3:45, Brittany texted to say she would be 30 minutes late. I replied that I had an appointment at 4:30 and would need her to arrive on time. It was not entirely untrue. I had scheduled a consultation with an attorney for later that week, and even if the appointment was not that afternoon, the boundary was real. At 4:28, her car pulled in quickly, gravel crunching under the tires. She stepped inside with an exaggerated sigh. "Traffic was terrible," she said. I handed her the small backpack and kissed my grandson on the forehead. I will not be available every Tuesday and Thursday anymore, I said calmly. She blinked, surprised. What do you mean? I held her gaze evenly. I mean I have my own schedule. The words sounded unfamiliar, but steady. She opened her mouth as if to protest, then closed it again. I did not argue. I did not explain. After they left, I locked the door and leaned my forehead briefly against the cool wood. For years I believed love required constant accessibility. That afternoon, I understood something different. Access is a privilege, and privileges can be adjusted. Daniel called that evening. Not a text. Not a short message with a question mark at the end. A call. I let it ring twice before answering. Not as a tactic, but because I needed the extra seconds to steady my breathing. His voice carried that familiar blend of concern and irritation. Mom, Brittany said you told her you are not watching Caleb on Tuesdays and Thursdays anymore. What is going on? I leaned back in my armchair and looked at the framed photograph of Daniel at age 10, holding a Little League trophy that was almost as tall as he was. Nothing is going on, I replied evenly. I simply have other commitments. There was a pause, longer this time. Since when, he asked. It was a simple question, but it revealed everything. Since when did my time require justification? Since when did my schedule belong to committee approval? Since now, I said. My voice surprised even me. It was not sharp. It was not defensive. It was calm in a way that made the silence on the other end grow heavier. He exhaled slowly. Mom, we depend on you. Daycare around here is expensive. You know that. I did know. I also knew that their recent weekend in California had cost more than 3 months of part-time childcare in our area. I chose my words carefully. I have helped for 3 years without hesitation. I am not withdrawing love. I am adjusting availability. He did not respond right away. I could almost hear him recalculating the new equation. Brittany feels like you are upset about Napa, he said finally. I let the statement settle between us. I am not upset about Napa, I answered. I am aware of Napa. The distinction mattered. Awareness changes posture. Awareness straightens the spine. He shifted the conversation quickly. Also, I tried using the card this afternoon, and it was declined. Was that a mistake? There it was. Not how are you feeling? Not are you doing all right? The card. I folded my hands in my lap and looked around my living room. At the sofa I paid off 15 years ago. At the lamp your father once repaired with careful patience. It was not a mistake, I said. Another silence, sharper this time. Mom, why would you do that without telling me? I thought about all the times decisions had been made without telling me. Trips booked. Plans changed. Expectations formed. Because it is my account, I replied gently. And I realized I need to review my finances more closely. His tone hardened slightly. This feels sudden. I almost smiled. It only felt sudden because I had delayed it for so long. It is not sudden, I said quietly. It is overdue. We ended the call without resolution. No shouting. No dramatic words. Just distance, newly defined. After I hung up, I walked through my house slowly, room by room. The guest bedroom still held a small basket of toys. The pantry still stocked the cereal my grandson liked. I did not feel anger toward him, or even toward Brittany. What I felt was clarity. I had confused usefulness with belonging. I had believed that being needed meant being valued. That night, I took the spare key Brittany once carried and removed the hook labeled family from my key rack. I did not throw it away. I simply placed it in a drawer. Some doors do not need to be slammed to be closed. Sometimes they only need to be quietly reclaimed. The house felt different the morning after that call. Not quieter, not louder, just rearranged in a way that only I could sense. I woke up at 6:30 out of habit, even though no small sneakers would be racing across my floors that day. I brewed my coffee and carried it to the back porch, wrapping a light cardigan around my shoulders against the crisp Ohio air. For the first time in years, my calendar on the refrigerator did not have Daniel's schedule written in blue ink. No pickup times. No reminders to pack snacks. Just blank squares waiting to be claimed. Around 8:15, my phone vibrated with a message from Brittany. We need to talk. Daniel is really stressed. I read it once, then set the phone face down on the patio table. Stress had become their universal language for expectation. If they felt inconvenience, it translated into my responsibility. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I opened the small notebook I had been keeping and reviewed the numbers again. $78,000 over 3 years. That amount could have covered my property taxes for nearly a decade. It could have funded a modest scholarship at the local community college in my husband's name. It could have secured my own long-term care should I ever need it. I realized that generosity without structure is simply leakage. At 10 o'clock, Daniel called again. His voice was less calm this time. "Mom, we are trying to understand why you are pulling away like this." I let the phrase settle. Pulling away. As if I had been drifting somewhere distant, instead of standing in the same house I have owned for 32 years. "I am not pulling away," I said steadily. "I am stepping back." He sighed audibly. "It feels like you are punishing us." That word lingered longer than the others. Punishment implies wrongdoing. It implies authority. I was not punishing anyone. I was correcting an imbalance. "Daniel," I said, choosing each word with care, "helping you is my choice. Continuing to help is also my choice. I am allowed to reevaluate." There was a long pause. "Brittany thinks you are being dramatic," he said quietly. I almost smiled at the predictability of it. Dramatic would have been yelling. Dramatic would have been posting something pointed online or showing up unannounced at their house. I had done none of those things. I had simply removed a credit card and adjusted my availability. If boundaries look dramatic to someone, it usually means they were benefiting from the lack of them. After we ended the call, I drove into town and stopped by the hardware store. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside. I purchased a new deadbolt for the back door, not because I expected confrontation, but because I wanted to feel the finality of turning my own key. That afternoon, I replaced the lock myself. The metal clicked firmly into place. It was a small, practical action, measured in inches and screws, but it carried weight. I was not closing my life to my family. I was redefining the terms of entry. And for the first time in a long while, the silence in my home did not feel like abandonment. It felt like ownership. 2 days passed without another call. The silence stretched longer than usual, and I could almost feel the distance recalibrating itself like a scale finding balance. On Friday afternoon, I drove to the small law office on Main Street for the consultation I had scheduled earlier in the week. The building was modest, red brick with a brass plaque beside the door that read Thomas Avery, Estate Planning. I had not stepped into an attorney's office since my husband and I drafted our original will nearly 20 years ago. Back then, everything felt straightforward. We assumed our son would inherit the house, the savings, the quiet rewards of 2 careful lives. We never imagined that inheritance might require conditions. I sat across from Mr. Avery and explained, calmly and without drama, that I wanted to review my estate plan. He asked practical questions. Did I wish to change beneficiaries? Did I want to establish a trust? Did I have concerns about financial management? I answered each one thoughtfully. I was not acting out of spite. I was acting out of clarity. I told him I wanted any future inheritance for my grandson placed into a trust that would not be accessible until he turned 25. I wanted distributions to be structured, educational expenses covered directly, not filtered through parental accounts. I wanted safeguards. Not because I did not love my family, but because love without structure had already proven expensive. When I left the office, I felt lighter, as if I had just completed a long, overdue chore. That evening, Daniel showed up unannounced. I saw his car pull into the driveway just before sunset. I did not rush to the door. I finished rinsing the dinner plate in my sink and dried my hands carefully before opening it. He stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets, uncertainty written across his face. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table that had held an untouched anniversary dinner weeks earlier. He looked around the room as if noticing it for the first time. "Brittany is worried," he began. "She thinks you are shutting us out." I folded my hands together and met his eyes. "I am not shutting you out," I said quietly. "I am protecting what I have left." He frowned slightly. "From us." I considered the question carefully. "From imbalance," I replied. "From assumption. From the idea that my resources are automatic." He leaned back in his chair, absorbing the words. "You never said it was a problem before." I nodded. That was my mistake. There it was. Ownership without self-blame. I had participated in the pattern. I had allowed access without boundaries. "So what happens now?" he asked. His voice sounded younger in that moment, almost like the boy who once needed help tying his shoes. "Now," I said steadily, "we build a relationship that does not depend on what I provide financially." He did not argue. He did not agree. He simply sat there, quiet. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like the adult in the room not because I was older, but because I was clear. Daniel left that night without raising his voice, but the air he left behind felt unsettled, as if something invisible had shifted its weight in the room. I washed the 2 coffee mugs we had used and placed them carefully back in the cabinet Brittany once reorganized. I noticed that I did not feel guilty. That surprised me more than anything else. For years, guilt had been my reflex. If Daniel was disappointed, I searched for my error. If Brittany was distant, I questioned my tone. That evening, I slept through the night without replaying the conversation in my head. The next morning, Brittany called directly. Her voice was polite, but tight around the edges. "Margaret, I think we need to clear the air," she said. I appreciated that she used my name instead of Mom. It felt more honest. "All right," I replied. She wasted little time. "Daniel says you are changing things financially and legally. That feels extreme." I stood at my kitchen window while she spoke, watching a delivery truck move slowly down the street. "Extreme." The word echoed softly. "Reviewing my finances is not extreme," I said calmly. "It is responsible." She exhaled sharply. "It just feels like you do not trust us." I considered her statement carefully. Trust is not the absence of boundaries. It is the presence of respect. "I trust that you both will make decisions for your household," I answered. "And I am making decisions for mine." There was a brief silence. "Are you upset about the trip?" she asked again, as if returning to familiar ground might restore control. "No," I said. "I am learning." My tone did not rise. It did not fall. It remained steady. She shifted tactics. "Caleb misses his Tuesdays," she said. That sentence carried more weight than the others. I felt it in my chest. "I love that boy. I love him," I replied softly. "And I will always make time to see him. But love does not require a fixed schedule that only works for one side." She did not respond immediately. I imagined her standing in her own kitchen, perhaps pacing slightly, trying to measure how much pressure to apply. "So what does this look like now?" she asked finally. It was the same question Daniel had asked, but it sounded different coming from her. Less confused. More strategic. "It looks like calling before coming over," I said. "It looks like planning visits in advance. It looks like financial independence." I could almost hear her processing the loss of convenience. "This is going to be an adjustment," she admitted. I nodded even though she could not see me. "It is," I agreed. After we ended the call, I sat down at the kitchen table again. The house felt quiet, but not fragile. I realized that what unsettled them was not my anger. It was my calm. I had not accused. I had not demanded repayment. I had simply redrawn the lines around my own life. That kind of change does not create noise. It creates distance. And distance reveals whether a relationship was built on presence or on access. The following Sunday, I drove to Daniel's house for the first time since everything shifted. I did not bring groceries. I did not bring an envelope with a check tucked discreetly inside a birthday card. I brought a small tin of homemade oatmeal cookies for Caleb and nothing else. The driveway was full when I arrived. Brittany's sister's car sat beside Daniel's truck, and I could hear laughter drifting through the open windows. I paused for a moment before stepping out of my sedan, noticing how different it felt to approach their home without the quiet weight of obligation. When Brittany opened the door, her smile was practiced but polite. "Margaret, come in," she said. I stepped inside and handed Caleb the cookie tin. His face lit up in the uncomplicated way children respond to simple kindness. I hugged him tightly, breathing in the scent of sunscreen and laundry detergent. The adults gathered around the kitchen island, glasses of iced tea sweating onto marble countertops I had once contributed to during their remodel. The conversation moved quickly from school updates to a new patio set they were considering. I listened more than I spoke. I noticed how often expenses were discussed casually, as if money appeared from an invisible source. At one point, Brittany mentioned a possible spring break trip to Florida. "Flights are outrageous right now," she said, shaking her head lightly. The words hovered in the air for a second longer than necessary. In the past, that would have been my cue. I would have offered to look into it. I would have said something about airline miles or early booking discounts. This time I simply nodded. "Travel is expensive," I agreed calmly. The conversation moved on without my contribution. Daniel watched me closely, as if waiting for a familiar pattern to reemerge. It did not. After lunch, Caleb asked if I could come to his soccer game the following Saturday. His eyes were hopeful. "If you send me the time and location, I will be there," I said warmly. Brittany glanced at Daniel, then back at me. We usually just drop him off at your place afterward, she added carefully. I met her gaze. That will not work for me, I replied evenly. But I am happy to cheer from the sidelines. There was no argument, only adjustment. Later, as I prepared to leave, Daniel walked me to my car. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway. You seem different, he said quietly. I rested my hand on the door handle and considered his words. I answered. I am more aware. He studied my face, perhaps searching for resentment. He did not find it. What he found instead was steadiness. We are not trying to take advantage of you, he said, almost defensively. I nodded. I know, I replied. But sometimes people do not realize they are leaning too heavily until the support shifts. I kissed his cheek and got into my car. As I drove away, I did not feel excluded. I felt repositioned. I was still his mother, still Caleb's grandmother. But I was no longer the silent sponsor of every convenience. I was present by choice, not by default. And that difference changed everything. The weeks that followed did not erupt into drama. There were no slammed doors or harsh words exchanged across kitchen counters. Instead, there was space. Space where urgency used to live. Space where expectation once filled every corner. Daniel called less frequently at first, perhaps testing whether distance would draw me back into old habits. It did not. When he did call, the conversations were different. He asked about my book club. He asked whether my arthritis had been bothering me with the colder weather. The questions were simple, but they carried something new in their tone. Curiosity instead of calculation. One Saturday afternoon, I sat on a metal bleacher at Caleb's soccer game, the autumn wind cutting gently across the field. I wore a thick sweater and held a thermos of coffee between my hands. When Caleb spotted me, he waved enthusiastically before running back to his position. I cheered when he kicked the ball, not because I had funded the uniform or paid the league fees, but because I was his grandmother. Present, not obligated. After the game, Daniel walked over with a tentative smile. Thanks for coming, Mom, he said. There was no mention of schedules or drop-offs, just gratitude. I nodded and told him I was proud of Caleb's effort. Brittany joined us a moment later. Her expression was softer than it had been weeks earlier. We are looking into a different daycare arrangement, she said, almost matter of fact. It will cost more, but we will figure it out. I met her eyes and offered a small, respectful smile. You will, I said. I believe that. Independence has a way of strengthening people when they are required to stand on it. That evening, back in my quiet house, I walked through each room slowly. The locks were secure. The cabinets were arranged the way I preferred. The calendar on my refrigerator held my own appointments in neat black ink. A museum visit with a friend. A doctor's checkup. A weekend trip I was planning to take alone to visit a historic inn 2 hours away. I had not realized how much of myself I had postponed. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table that had once held untouched candles and cooling sauce, and reflected on the shift that had taken place. I had not lost my son. I had not abandoned my family. I had simply stepped out of a role that required me to give without being seen. The difference was subtle but profound. Love remained, but access had changed. I understood now that closeness is healthiest when it is chosen, not assumed. When Daniel called later that night to tell me Caleb wanted to bake cookies together the following weekend, I agreed without hesitation. It was an invitation, not an expectation. And as I turned off the kitchen lights and headed upstairs, I felt something steady settle inside me. I had not closed my door to my family. I had learned how to decide when to open it.